Warning! Warning! This podcast contains spoilers.
Listen at your own risk.
Welcome to Medium Shift, the podcast that investigates how stories stack up from medium to medium through the adaptation process.
Today, we fly into the Solana galaxy with Ratchet and Clank.
Welcome to Medium Shift. I'm Chris.
And I'm Ev.
So Ratchet and Clank, the 2016 film based on the 2016 video game, which was adapted from the 2002 video game.
Or you could also look at it as the 2016 movie based on the 2002 game, which spawned its own 2016 video game. Depends on how you look at it.
Well, they were developed at the same time, weren't they?
It was an interesting sort of... Originally, I believe, the game started coming out as a reimagining first, and then the movie finally picked up speed, because it'd been in the works for quite a while on the movie. The movie suddenly picked up, did quite a lot in a short amount of time, and the game basically held off and just went, alright, let's link it into the movie.
I see. It was the other way around, basically.
Yes, that is one of the things I've heard, although, again, it could be a little... I wasn't there, so...
No, that's fair. I mean, I wasn't particularly familiar with it, but I did know that it had a relatively contentious and difficult production cycle. I mean, video games almost always do, but this is one of those movies that, as you said, was sort of stuck in development hell for quite some time. Honestly, like a lot of video game movies. And I mean, Ratchet and Clank's always sort of been a prime example of what could become a film franchise. It just took a really long time for it to happen. So, speaking of the film itself, when the galaxy comes under threat of a nefarious space captain, a mechanic and his newfound robot ally join an elite squad of combatants to save the universe. So, what do we think of the movie?
I come into this movie with a lot of background information, in the sense that I loved the video games as a kid. I got Ratchet and Clank 3 when I first got my PS2. It was one of the games that came looped in with the bundle. And I sat down and I played it and I fell in love. It is one of the few games that I've got that I've completed to 100% completion multiple times. I keep throwing back to it to the point where I've literally destroyed a controller from overuse.
Bloody hell.
Playing just this game. And after that, I've then gone back and played 1 and 2 and delved in a bit to the Future series and the spin-off series. So for those who don't know, the Ratchet and Clank games were Ratchet and Clank 2 Going Commando, Ratchet and Clank 3 Up Your Arsenal, and Ratchet and Clank Gladiator, or as known in the US, Deadlocked. That was the original 4 games. Then they brought in a sort of revamp for the next generation, which was known as the Ratchet and Clank Future series, which was still a continuation of the original 4, but with different graphics, a little bit different gameplay. And then they had a series of spin-off games that were also released at the time. Then there was a long break, and then the movie happened, and the new game at the same time. So...
all that aside...
So, that was all the information that I had coming into this movie. So, you could say my expectations were fairly established and quite high. I was ready to either love this movie or hate this movie with a passion.
And?
It's swinging more to the love side, I will admit. I don't think it was done to the best of its ability, but there was enough for an avid fan like me to just latch onto and love. It changed a lot from the original games. They introduced a whole mix. Instead of being a direct copy of the first game, it was the first game's storyline, but with all the other changes they'd sort of made in the main series and the Future series sort of pushed in together. They introduced more characters, they sort of diversified, and they changed the character arc for a few of the main characters. Which, all in all, some of it still not much of a fan of, but in my heart, the 12-year-old kid in me is absolutely just jumping for joy watching this film. So I can't really oppose him.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. So, I was not actually aware of what you thought of this film before we actually sat down to record this podcast. My background as well, I played some of the earlier games at a friend's place when I was younger, but beyond that, I've only just had a passing awareness of the Ratchet and Clank franchise. And so going to this film, I had virtually no expectations. Like, I was vaguely familiar, but not familiar enough that I had any sort of real set preconceived notions about where they're going to go. So all that being said, I hated this movie. I thought it was terrible. Like, last week when we saw Aragon, I really thought that'd be scraping the lowest in the barrel that we could go for a while. But no, this just went down and down and down. Like, imagine the easiest and laziest and cheapest gags in story possible, and your expectations are still too high for this movie. I'm sorry, I did not like this film at all. So it's going to make things really, really interesting, coming from an ardent fan who really enjoyed it, and then someone who's relatively new who basically despised it. This is probably one of the worst films I've seen for a good while.
Wow.
Yeah.
I will admit, a lot of my love for this is probably coming from the fact that I did grow up heavily invested in this series.
Oh, sure, and you shouldn't discount that as well, obviously.
But the jokes that you sort of were bringing up as very lowbrow, the sort of not very well written, those jokes, were the jokes that sort of made the series. They were done a lot better in the video games, I will admit. There was a lot more sort of dry wit to it, and the characters of Ratchet and Clank had more of a sort of buddy cop type scenario going off. At the start, they weren't even like friends, because they just met. How's that gonna sort of happen? There was a young naivety in Clank, and there was sort of a rebellious teenager in Ratchet. And that sort of changed and grew, and their jokes were a bit more sarcastic and very tongue-in-cheek. Some of that I know, as a actual movie fan, clearly lost in translation, but I felt its heart was still sort of in the right place.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess it's difficult because I obviously didn't know where its heart was in the first place. And honestly, I could definitely see sort of like a younger audience getting a lot of enjoyment out of this movie, but as an adult watching it with no expectations for the franchise, I wasn't impressed by any of it, really. Like, I maybe chuckled once or twice, but it just felt like sort of the easy cash grab that a producer would put into a movie with all, like, these pop culture references and modern-day references just to appease to the young kids, without any sort of weight and spirit behind it. I really just thought it was, like, a shallow... Honestly, it felt like a cash grab. Like, a lot of video game movies that fail, you sort of just look at them and think, oh, people are just doing that because of the brand recognition, and this kind of felt the same to me, which is a shame, because, I mean... I would be totally on board for, this taking off as a great film franchise, and obviously more video game franchises need to have more success on the silver screen. This just wasn't the one for me. It tried to be Pixar and ended up being, like, Illumination. Yeah, not impressed at all.
Well, you seem to... I know you share a lot of opinions with the wider audience, especially the critic reviews. Most of those that I sort of came across were basically saying... Don't bother watching the movie. If you like Ratchet and Clank, just go straight for the new video game. Given that had ripped a lot of the direct content straight from the movie, and also changed up the game enough to sort of be a retooling of the original in a positive way. I'd probably have to say the same thing, despite how much I loved that. If you have the chance, if you had the choice between going for the game or the movie, I'd probably still recommend the game. Because there is something about that experience that you lack in this movie that, again, relates a bit to the sort of the heart that's there. It has it, but the fact that you aren't in that position, you aren't doing a lot of the fantastic gameplay that they have. One of the main staples of the game is the fact that you're running about in crazy scenarios, blasting everything with a huge collection of stupid gadgets and over-the-top guns. And if you sort of take that out, like the movie did... you're not going to have the same experience. So, despite how much I love the movie, I am always going to recommend the games over it, no matter what.
Yeah, and I mean, once I started looking into the games, so research for this episode, I found the same thing. It seemed like a lot of people's favourite things about the Ratchet and Clank series is, based in the fact that it's a video game. Like, sort of the great level design and the collection of weapons and so on and so forth. And that works so much better in such an active context that once you strip away all of that and sort of just leave the bare bones, hollow elements of the story, then there's just not enough there. So I can totally see where you're coming from. And honestly, I would say the same. Just play the games. Just ignore the movie. It's like, it's such a shame, because, I mean, video games have such potential to, make great stories on the screen, but we really haven't sort of cracked that formula. People haven't figured out how to turn an active audience into a passive audience and still let that be a satisfying experience. And it's a shame, really, because I think there's a lot of potential there, but hasn't happened yet, and definitely didn't happen in this context.
So, I want to hear your thoughts on the characters, because that, I feel, was one of the biggest sort of shifts they made in terms of the original 2002 game and this movie.
Right, okay. Well, it's sort of difficult because obviously I don't know what the characters were like originally, but Ratchet sort of struck me as basically every Star Wars protagonist ever, except more bland and generic, effectively. Like, I understand they were sort of going for a sarcastic, sort of sly wit. It's almost like a mix between Han Solo and Luke Skywalker, but I don't think either elements really worked. And really, he didn't, like... I definitely didn't hate the couple of main characters. It was more a lot of the supporting characters I despised in the actual construction of the movie itself. But really didn't leave much of an impression on me, honestly. So, how exactly would you describe the original characters in the games?
Well, let's take this all the way back. So, we start with Ratchet and Clank. In the original Ratchet and Clank, this is going to be confusing when I'm talking about the characters and the games, and they're both the exact same.
Yep, just go with it. We'll figure it out.
So, the characters of Ratchet and the character of Clank, in the original Ratchet and Clank, I'm trying my best here, because they sort of had that idea that it was going to be trailing on for at least one more game. There was that idea, and that's what they were hoping for. Their whole character development and friendship was stretched out over a long course. So originally, Ratchet was basically just a sort of teenager. He was sort of impulsive, a bit rebellious, and almost his entire motivation up until basically the last act of the first game was more for a selfish vendetta rather than trying to save anyone or be a hero. So in the first game, for those who don't know, Drex is the same villain in both of these. There is no Dr. Nefarious. He is one of the aspects that came in a later game.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I see how you sort of mean by, melding it together.
And it's him basically trying to create a new world, originally like it was in the movie, to house his new people, but in the end it's revealed actually he's just using it as a money grab, and he's going to do it to lots of other galaxies. So you had less sympathy for him. And he already had on board Captain Quark as his spokesperson. Because in the first game, Captain Quark is basically just this figurehead. You don't actually see him do a lot of the actual quote-unquote saving. He's basically just a glorified actor. And it's that sort of being betrayed by Quark after not really wanting to have to go through this entire process anyway in Ratchet. That is his entire motivation of, I just want revenge. And Clank has basically dropped in, I don't know where he's from, and he's a bit naive, and so it was all very sort of selfish. But over the course of the game, sort of realized, maybe I should be helping people. Wasn't into the second and third games where their friendship properly sort of bloomed, and they actually became heroes of the galaxy.
Right, okay.
Then you have Dr. Nefarious, like I mentioned, not in the first game and not in the second game. He was just the primary antagonist in his fully robot form in the third game, which a lot of people say is probably the best part about the third game was Dr. Nefarious. That's probably my biggest disappointment in the movie, is the fact that we don't get that Dr. Nefarious. We get his original organic, squishy version. I say squishy because that is what he called the organics in the third movie when he was trying to kill all organic life and make it robots.
Yep. Reference just a whoosh over my head. But sure.
I just saw the face that you made and just like, okay, he's gone a little weird now. No, these are direct references I'm making here.
No, continue.
But yeah, and he was the best. He had the manic laugh down pat, despite the fact that every time he did or got too angry, it randomly frees him and you'd start playing a radio play about a soap opera, which was It's a weird game, but it's absolutely fantastic if you get your hands on it.
I'm sure it made more sense in context.
It didn't.
Oh, yeah.
It just kept happening until he got reset by his robot butler.
Okay, sure. Yep.
It was very classic, almost Bond villainy type of thing.
Yeah.
But very self-aware Bond villainy on that part.
Which I appreciate. If you want to stop there for a moment, actually, I did end up watching quite a bit of the 2016 game and how it sort of related to the film. And they basically took, cutscenes from the game, put them into the movie and so on and so forth. I don't know which one came first, obviously. But I did find it interesting that a lot of the extended sequences in the game that sort of tied into like weird meta commentaries on the film and the game and so on and so forth were completely cut from the movie. Is that sort of meta aspect almost making fun of itself like a big part of the franchise? Because I didn't get that at all from the film, but I thought in the game that actually showed up quite a bit.
I don't know how gratuitous it is in the new one. I haven't actually spent a lot of time playing that yet because I haven't got a PS4. I almost considered getting a PS4 just for that game.
Oh, wow, okay.
I will admit. But didn't have the funds. But it is quite self-aware in a lot of cases. It knows what it is, and it plays up that fact.
Right, okay. Yeah, because that was something I did appreciate about the game that didn't show up at all in the movie. So yeah, interesting. I wasn't sure if it was such a bigger aspect of the film or not. Or the game, sorry.
The games that were made by Insomniac Studios, and they have quite a history of being very sort of tongue-in-cheek in their style.
Oh, for sure.
There's a great video series, actually, which is Let's Play, done by a couple of the guys who actually made the games, the Ratchet and Clank games. So if you look that up on YouTube, just Ratchet and Clank commentary, I think it was.
Okay, awesome.
You'll be able to find it, and it's a really interesting insight into sort of their own sense of humor, which is quite reflected in the games.
Playing through the first game, or...?
First 3 games.
Oh, wow, okay. Ah, interesting. I do sort of appreciate that. There's always sort of like a nice touch. Like I've played sort of Game of the Year versions of games before where they leave like little notes from the developers explaining, oh, this was initially this, and this came from this, and we cut this aspect and put this aspect in instead. And I've always found that really interesting, so I may have to look that up.
Well, it's another sort of point, leading into the meta sort of ideas of the game. Every game in the first 3, and I think later some of the other games had a thing called the Insomniac Museum.
Oh.
Which you could only access it either through completion of the full game, like 100%, or by hitting a secret level at a certain time. Like in Ratchet and Clank 3, there was a teleporter hidden away in one of the towers in Metropolis, where you could only access it if the game clock was set to 3 a.m.
Wow.
Because Ratchet and Clank 3.
Because of course.
Yes. But the entire aspect of the Insomniac Museum is basically a lot of their cut content that they'll throw in and just say, oh yeah, this was meant to be an enemy that you could have faced in this particular level. Face him now.
Wow.
Or they'll have like racetracks that they had designed for parts of the game that never made it in and just went, well, you're free to go now. Go wild.
Oh, interesting. No, I do sort of appreciate that. Yeah.
So
maybe I'm still trying to sort of gauge this as I go, but it does sound like the games at least have sort of like a tongue-in-cheek, almost lighthearted element that the film I don't think had. I think, would you sort of agree that the movie played it a little bit more seriously than the games in many respects?
It definitely did, especially I think in terms of the character of Ratchet.
Okay, sure.
Because a lot of that sort of tongue-in-cheek stuff comes from Ratchet and Clank. And the fact that Clank doesn't have as much to do in the movie, and Ratchet is sort of... They've changed his character to being more of a sort of fanboy. I feel that aspect sort of diminished it. And also their attempts to basically take Quark's story arc, which in the first 3 games basically goes from he is a cheap hero who's actually working for the villain because of money, to the second game where he is revealed to actually be the villain all along, so trying to regain his reputation while disguising as someone else. And in the third game, sort of trying to get back his heroic roots, but still being a horrible coward until the very end, where he comes in and is a selfless hero for the last moment.
Wow, righto. So basically the new film condenses 3 games worth of a narrative arc into 90 minutes.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. That might be another reason it didn't work.
And because of that, you don't also have the same connection between Ratchet and Quark as you do in these games, because it's 3 full games. They keep running into each other, and they've fought, and they've teamed up, and everything in between, basically. You don't have that, and in doing that, you sort of... Ratchet became less of the sort of tongue-in-cheek meta character and became more of that, like you described, Luke Skywalker, very basic, let's just move the plot along character.
Yeah, hero's journey type, basically. Yeah. Okay, interesting. Well, I'm learning a lot about these games. This is good. This is very good.
And I'm slowly realizing I don't like the movie as much as I thought I did.
Good.
But I still probably, if I end up watching it again, I'll probably fall back in love, just with all the little side jokes and things I love.
I'm sure. I mean, I've had the same experience watching, a film or something that I've fan of before. Like, I found it interesting, actually, considering such, like, a hardcore Batman fan I have. I found it sort of extremes my opinion on anything Batman related. So I either love something Batman related or hate it. And there doesn't seem to be much in between. So honestly, I feel like that'd be applicable to a lot of franchises and how people approach it. Which is why people get so ardent and up in arms about, maybe it was a film that's just only decent because of their connection to the franchise. They love it so much more than, someone coming to the franchise for the first time may not necessarily appreciate. So it's interesting. Okay, cool. I'm trying to decide if there's anything else we actually want to talk about. I mean, I could criticize a lot of bits and pieces in the movie if I particularly wanted to, because a lot of it really frustrates me, but I don't think anyone wants to listen to that, honestly, so...
Well, if there's anything, like, particular... Maybe I could shine some light as a different perspective, possibly, if there is something very in particular you wanted to talk about.
A few bits and pieces. I mean, it's mostly just criticizing the fact that everyone has flip phones and yes is tweeting. I don't really understand how that makes sense. If they're going for modern references, why don't they have smartphones? Why are they doing everything on a flip phone? Like, how does that make sense if they're trying to do a modern reference? Like, this film can't even do a modern reference right. It's really...
Yeah, okay, I got nothing.
It's really stupid. And, okay, here's another thing I actually have a problem with. Clank's origin. How does that make sense? It's the essentially equivalent of a car manufacturer, car conveyor belt, suddenly just, oh, whoops, we accidentally made a boat. Let's go destroy it. Like, how the hell does any of that make sense?
Okay, so, let's talk about Clank's origin a bit.
Okay.
Because that first sequence was very similar to how it was in the original game.
Oh, really?
It wasn't done by Nefarious, it was done by Drax, and it was less fully aware and autonomized. It was basically just the conveyor belt. And later on, you sort of see... the machine itself that was making the robots may have actually done that on purpose. He refers to the machine as his mother, and mother contacts, and there's a great little scene at the end, spoiler alert, where they basically go to the computer, and the computer tells them how to defeat Drax, and says she is proud of Clank.
Wow, okay. This is getting weirdly Freudian. Sure.
Yeah. Well, it's... I wouldn't say... Freudian as much it is sort of basically just sort of that innocence, because Clank at this point, he's naive, he's straight out, he's getting all his information from infobots. Basically, it's very much he sees the good in people. It's the reverse of what all the other robots were doing. And it's basically everything that the malicious robots had taken out were sort of put into Clank. Basically.
Right, so he's the complete antithesis of a warbot, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah, right, okay.
And he doesn't get a lot of like the things you see him, like the boosters, thrusters, helicopter blades. All of that comes later through sort of meeting other characters in the game.
Sure, okay. Interesting. Okay, I mean, that makes more sense. Obviously, none of that is in the movie, so,
it is.
You can't use that as an excuse for the film.
No, I'm not.
No, I do appreciate that there's at least it's a little bit better thought out in the original game, so, yep.
But at the same time, the original game, that opening bit, it's still basically just, the tiny robot has come out.
Yep.
You also, in the game, he does become big through the enlargizer, I think they call it.
Oh, wow.
I don't know. There's a lot of very much tongue-in-cheek, just applied phlebotom, I think they've called it. Where it's very much just... No, the idea that it's just there to continue and improve the story. And they basically reference that and just like, we're basically just... We want to have a giant mech fight, and so now Clank is becoming big.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
Oh, look, let's go talk to that guy. He looks like he can advance the plot. Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah. So one other thing I actually did want to talk about the film, probably another reason why it failed indirectly, was basically the production behind it. So I did a little bit of digging on the studio behind the Ratchet and Clank movie. So they had not only produced 23 different Barbie films beforehand, but have been constantly creating Hot Wheels series, had only one feature-length movie to their name, which was Escape to Planet Earth, and is objectively terrible, and had two directors which which one of them had directed a film before and the other one had never directed a movie before. So similar to Aragon, it really feels like this was the wrong creative team to bring into the project. Even looking into it, the actual original creator of the series proposed a script for the film and sent them over to him, which they did not use, and ended up sort of throwing out for their own design on the story, basically. Which really seems like a very, very stupid idea to completely ignore the whole intentions behind the original creator of the series, and kind of just really, for me personally, reinforces how much of a lazy cash grab this was, honestly. It really doesn't feel like the passion or the intention to make a good movie was in this project from the get-go.
Well, there's an interesting point I want to quickly mention about the directors. One of the co-directors, Kevin Munro,
Yes.
actually started as a video game director. He got in with a visa. He studied film, but couldn't get a working visa in the film industry, but could in the video game industry.
Oh, interesting.
So he started with that, and then eventually started making his own films on the side, which led to him becoming a proper director. So his entire point going into this was basically, if the video game works, don't try and fix what's not broken. That was his sort of mantra behind it, which I find interesting watching the movie and having played the games. How much of what he wanted and how much he thought his idea actually made it into the game, and what was either lies or complete changing by the production heads.
Yeah, that narrative doesn't seem to make sense to me. I wasn't actually familiar that he originally worked in games. Even so, I mean, it's entirely possible it might have just been studio meddling. I mean, this film was delayed a number of times and in production hell, and also tried to come out at the same time as a video game, which almost always screams just cash grab. Let's have two things with the same name come out at the same time so everyone does the two things at once. And so it's entirely possible that he did go out there to make a good Ratchet and Clank game, but it was sort of just completely lost in the spiral of studio interference and lazy cash grab, so...
There's another sort of, just on top of that, just add more facts and convoluted garbage to this mess that we're discussing. The person who played Drek in the game, who's Kevin Richardson, he originally was brought on like James Arnold Taylor and David Kay, who played Ratchet and Clank in most of the original games and played in the movie. Kevin was meant to continue playing Drek, but at some point, for undisclosed reason, he was quietly moved out and replaced with Paul Giamatti, who is known. He's a big name.
Yeah, that's the other interesting thing about this movie. Yeah. This movie managed to have John Goodman, Sylvester Stallone, and Paul Giamatti, which, honestly, I mean, considering they don't really voice the characters in the game, I mean, a number of them don't. Paul Giamatti does, I am aware.
Yes,
but John
he is
Goodman...
the only character that I believe actually came from the game.
Okay.
His character. As far as I know, Victor, he was put into the 2016 game, but wasn't in any of the ones that came before. The assistants of Captain Rest of the Rangers, the main named Rangers, they were not present in the original games.
Right.
John Goodman's character, Grimroth, I believe he was called. He wasn't, John Goodman definitely wasn't his character, and if that character was in fact in the games, which I'm struggling to remember, he may have been in the first one, but it was a minor role compared to what it was in this.
Okay.
So it's sort of interesting to look at, well, maybe they had to be brought in to try and get some perceived star power into this game.
Make it more like a bigger of a name brand, essentially. Because, I mean, you know, as good as the voice actors are for Ratchet and Clank, they're not going to sell a film. Not the way like John Goodman or Paul Giamatti and Sylvester Stallone will. I mean, there is still the argument to be made that star power these days doesn't matter and it's franchises that sell it, but I don't want to harp onto that because that's a whole other tangent. Yeah. But it does sort of speak to the fact that this was basically trying to, you know, once again break into the whole film thing and trying to bring people to watch it which may not be familiar with the game, and didn't succeed because this movie did not make much money at all. No. Honestly, well deserved.
But hey, Kevin Richardson almost got paid anyway because the movie studio accidentally sent Paul Giamatti's check to his house.
Holy crap, really?
Yes. They hadn't realised they hadn't changed the address yet.
Oh, that's great. And really talks to all the professionalism that clearly happened behind this movie. Oof, that's really unfortunate. Right, so I think that sort of summarizes how much of a mess I thought this movie was.
And how much of a lovable mess I thought it was.
Hey, people can love trash, it's fine, it's fine.
And I will forever love the Wilhelm scream joke that they threw in there.
Oh, God. Wilhelm, no! I mean, that was sort of the equivalent of a dad joke for me, basically. Like, I cringed horribly, but it was one of the few times that I just chuckled just because it was so terrible. I mean, incredibly lazy as well, because it's the easiest thing to just throw in, and someone's like, a Wilhelm scream! And then that was it, but did get a mild chuckle out of me. Mm-hmm. So, moving on to do it differently then, shall we?
Jingle, 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 jingle.
Jingle, 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 jingle.
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 Okay.
That was a new one.
Yeah.
Alright, so I believe it's my turn to go first, actually. Okay. So, much similar to Aragon, honestly, and a lot of the bad movies that we've talked to, I really just wanted to suggest completely retooling the production of this film from the ground up. So not only get rid of the studio, bring in our Blue Sky Studio, which honestly I think would do a much better job, and then get it written, directed by Phil Lord and Chris Miller. Because honestly, those two guys are some of the best comedians working in the business at the moment. They have a proven track record in animation with Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs and the Lego Movie, as well as 21 Jump Street and 22 Jump Street, which is also great. They also kicked off the Han Solo movie, but that's a whole other story as well. I really think their style of comedy and their affinity with animation that's been shown in the other two movies would basically be a perfect formula for bringing the Ratchet and Clank franchise to the film. Honestly, I don't know how similar it would end up being to the games, because it would very much be their own take on the franchise, but really I feel like that'd be the better way going about it. Like, especially, I wonder one of the best ways to bridge the gap between video games and film is to just boil down the elements of the franchise into something basic and then get someone who's not familiar with the game at all, so doesn't know anything about how the game plays or anything like that, and then just build it from those narrative elements. And I really think that'd be the best way to not only make this film, but make a good video game movies. And hopefully this would be an example when it was. And honestly, at this point, I would watch anything Phil Lord and Chris Miller does, because the Lego Movie is one of my favourite movies of all time, and Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs is also an amazing movie that everyone else should watch.
So your main point is bring in people who know what they're doing and don't give them any information except for base narratives.
Yes. Let them own take on the franchise, basically. Just completely fresh. And I understand that might be a little bit difficult for people familiar with the Ratchet and Clank, but honestly I feel like would eventually lead to a better movie that more people could appreciate that weren't familiar with the franchise.
I've gone for the opposite.
Oh, okay.
My basic thought was get the guys from Insomniac Games to basically make the movie. Because they've shown in the past they're very clever. The original games stand out for that. And if it was basically just them given free reign of a movie, I will admit, could turn out horribly. But I just want to see what would happen, honestly. I feel they have enough skill in themselves in order to make something interesting. They have in the past with video games. Let's just see what happens in a more sort of linear news system. And it would also mean that they stay more true to the original characters, which I feel is the main drawback of the movie.
Sure. No, I mean, I can definitely get behind that. I do think it's risky, especially getting a video game studio to make a movie that has happened and has created disasters many, many times in the past. But hey, I mean, I'm definitely one who to give Insomnia the benefit of the doubt. I'm not familiar with the Ratchet and Clank games, but I am familiar with some of their other projects. And they are, a very, very popular and well-regarded studio. So, hey, sure. I mean, I'd love to see what they would come up with. I don't know if it'd necessarily be good or even succeed or make any money, but why not?
That's what it's about in the end.
Exactly. Yeah.
You need to take risks to find that reward.
Yeah. Creativity is built on risks. And creativity, when that risks is not creativity at all. Cool. Jingle, jingle, jingle.
A lot shorter than last time.
Yeah, it's good. No, keep it succinct. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those movies that you can't really sort of, I mean, for me personally, rejig bits and pieces. You gotta start from the ground up, basically. Same thing with Aragon. I feel like a lot of the time with bad movies, it's not a matter of just changing a handful of things. It's basically starting from scratch.
Yeah.
Cool. So, what have you been doing, /watching, /reading, /eating, /enduring recently?
Are you just going to keep adding to this list?
Oh, yeah,
each
exactly.
Episode?
Yeah, you figured out my shtick.
Okay. Yep. I most recently watched a little film called Dude Bro Party Massacre 3.
Right. Okay. This is a recommend? Just confirming?
Sort of.
Okay, sure. Continue.
It is I've been meaning to watch it for a little while. It came out in 2015, and it was basically a self-financed / Kickstarter-backed movie by some internet sketch comedians called 5-Second Films. So 5-Second Films were a little group of filmmakers, writers, editors, actors that sort of got together and literally made 5-second films. The videos were 8 seconds long. It was 2 seconds for titles, 5 seconds of content, and then 1 second end sequence.
Wow, okay.
And they released one every weekday for 5 years.
Holy crap.
Yes.
That's quite an impressive work ethic. I mean, I guess it is also, only 5 seconds of content, but sure.
So they amassed quite a big following thanks to that, and they decided to take one of their 5-second films, which was a fake trailer for a movie called Dude Bro Party Massacre 3, about a evil murdering villain called Motherface killing a bunch of frat boys.
Freudian again. What is with the mother figure appearing in this episode?
Well, in this particular case, it had more to do with the fact that they were attempting to subvert a lot of the original sort of so bad they're good 80s slasher movies, in which
I see.
An evil villain kills a bunch of sorority girls, and weirdly sexist, and they decide to, well, what happens if we just gender flip everything and then poke fun of itself?
Sure, it's one of those.
So it's a real homage, as well as sort of a spoof of those kinds of movies. Whether they succeed or fail, I'll leave up to you. It's very much divided. There seems to be a lot of people who absolutely love it. I did read, hilariously, one negative review done by the website Uprocks, who is probably one of the biggest companies to give it a negative review. They were also the company that had worked a lot with 5-second films and basically had gave a lot of thanks to their multimedia department to 5-second films. So the one team that was given a negative score was the one that would benefit most out of them getting a high
succeeding.
Yeah.
Right? No journalistic integrity.
Yeah, good on them.
Yeah.
But yes, it's essentially about it is the third in a non-existent trilogy,
Of course.
in which the character of Brent secretly joins the fraternity of Delta Bi to find out what happened to his murdered twin brother.
Okay. Okay.
And after a prank gone wrong, in which they accidentally crash two 747s into each other over an orphanage.
What?
They are sent to the isolated and abandoned sorority house by the lake. A lake which was created accidentally by one of their past pranks. Where they again get tortured and tormented by the villain known as Motherface.
Okay. Okay. Yes.
It's filled with great cameos by people like Patton Oswalt playing the police chief.
Okay, that's actually a pretty good get.
Yes, well, he's done a lot of work in their 5SF films. Andrew WK has a brief cameo as one of the frat guys, who his entire rockstar persona is completely ruined as he's only there for the fix it up montage.
Wow.
And there's a very, very brief cameo of Larry King.
Oh, Larry King?
Yes, who was purely in the movie because during an interview with 5SF he said, "I'd love to get killed in a movie." So they brought him on just to get killed.
I need to watch this thing.
So yes, it's one of those movies you'll go in and you'll either love it or you'll hate it. This will basically help sum up a bit of its comedy in the sense that one of the main writers and creators of 5SF, Michael Rusley, was also patient zero on the cult following of The Room.
Oh, wow.
He was one of the first people to actually watch it, one of the few people to watch it in its original cinema run, and basically the guy who kickstarted the whole trend.
Yikes. He hated it before it was cool.
He loved it.
Well,
because it sucks so much.
He loved hating it because it was cool.
To the point where they brought on one of the main actors in The Room into this movie.
Oh, wow.
Just because they built up that kind of relationship.
Oh, awesome. Okay, what'd you say this was called?
Dude Bro Party Massacre 3.
Dude Bro Party Massacre 3. Okay, I'm gonna have to watch that later. Just, I may end up hating it, but with a recommendation like that, sweet Jesus, I can't top that. Why did you have to go first? Bloody hell, I was just going to recommend Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. Like, I mean, I referenced it before. It's a good animated movie, but honestly, go watch that instead.
But again, I warn you, may not to be to your liking unless you really like that kind of stuff. So please don't send us hate mail.
Oh, sure. I mean,
send it to them.
It sounds like
they made the movie.
It sounds like one of those things. It's you either love it or you hate it. Oh man, wow. All right then, good. Well, thanks for listening to this episode of Medium Shift. You can find us at mediumshift@gmail.com. Feel free to send recommendations or love or hate, or even just to get something off your chest. We'll happily take something so we can blackmail with you later. Next week...
That is our entire business plan, in fact. We're not getting advertisers. No one's going to advertise on this crappy podcast. So instead, we're just blackmailing our audience.
Yep. Hey, you need to make a living somehow. So next week, we're going to be going back into World War II to fight the mentally handicapped.
Doing Captain America. The First Avenger!
Ooh, I liked that. Yeah, for people who didn't see, which is everyone, he just did the whole salute. So, very nice touch. Very nice touch.
Although, now that I think about it, I basically just did the Futurama salute. So, maybe not the best representation of American military.
Hey, they will never know.
Yeah.
Alright, until next time, fare thee well.
Bye!